This video has been made with the purpose of education and awareness of real crimes, and there is no disrespect intended to anyone. This is to help promote truth and justice for anyone who has been a victim of crime. What I'm about to report is what I have researched online, and I will welcome any corrections should they be required. Hi there little berries and newberries, Aylesbury here, hope you are well. It is quite warm still and I have my trusty cooling pink collar on to keep me nice and cool as I make this video. I want to give some trigger warnings at the very beginning. This is a very heavy case, heavy with domestic violence and coercive control, resulting in murder. If that's a triggering thing to you, please do not watch this video and please watch something that you feel may be more appropriate for you. But I want to give that warning at the outset. We have discussed and talked about domestic violence on previous videos, very recent ones as Preston. It's something that we really need to stop stigmatizing, that domestic violence somehow has some sort of victim blame attached to it. It does not. What we need to be asking is, why do perpetrators abuse, as opposed to why don't victims leave or do something? Before starting that, at the very beginning, I actually want to give a shout out and a thank you to my channel members. I want to start doing this at the beginning of the videos. So we have Reality Check, Alf, Candy Ray, Denty and Shaz, and Checking Convictions. Thank you so much for your patronage to this channel. It is really very much appreciated. If you wish to become a member of the channel, it is $2.99 a month, whatever that is in your currency, and I will be giving channel members early access to videos, members only videos, members only posts, and we are basically building a community of what I call an orchard. So I've created this orchard on Photoshop and a tree which I call a Newberry tree, and every time I get a new member I add a tree, and at the moment we have 5 trees. I am hoping to create a forest of trees. Everyone will have their own tree. I also have a vine of 10 berries per bunch, so every time I get another 10 members I add another bunch to the vine. A subscription to the channel doesn't cost anything. You can just click the button and you're a subscriber. You're already a little berry as soon as you do that. If you want to become a channel member, you become a Newberry tree. This is the case of Christopher Donnelly, who was born in around 1963. He was a very intelligent and creative man. He was a qualified biochemist. He also played the flute, saxophone and clarinet. He studied music at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London. He learnt to play all those instruments, but then also became a music teacher. In 1992, 29-year-old Christopher Donnelly met 28-year-old midwife Hannegret, a woman originally from Germany. I'm not sure what her maiden name was, I haven't been able to find that, but basically they fell in love, they got married, and they settled in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire in the UK. They had their first child together in 1997 and eventually going on to have 4 children in total over a period of 8 years. Despite her having trained and qualified as a midwife, Hannegret decided when she became a mother that she would be a full-time mother. She would be a stay-at-home housewife and mother, and also teacher. She didn't send her children to school, she homeschooled them. The family was very religious. They believed that the end times were imminent and they shunned modern technology. In the sort of early to mid 90s, mobile phones weren't really widespreadly used, but the Donnellys didn't even have a landline. I mean, if they had a landline connected to the house, but they disconnected it, so they never ever used a phone. And when mobile phones came into the picture, none of them ever acquired a mobile phone. Neither Christopher, Hannegret, or the children. They never went on the internet, so there were no computers, no any other devices. Technology was shunned, and this also included cameras. There are not many photographs of the Donnellys at all, and in the episode of Meet, Marry, Murder, it is mentioned in there that there are no photographs at all of the Donnellys that have entered the public domain. So we don't even have a photograph of Christopher Donnelly. And I can understand, not allowing photographs of his children, of their children, to be leaked to the public. We do have some images, though, of Hannegret. Not only did the Donnellys homeschool their children, and they didn't have any means of communication with the outside world, they actually didn't socialise outside of their house either. They didn't really have anything to do with neighbours, and they were very much within themselves. They kept themselves to themselves. Christopher was a very placid, peace-loving, very gentle man. He loved his job. He was creative. He was very smart. But when he was around 52, 53, I'm not sure exactly what ailment he had, but something forced him to stop working. He became disabled and had to stay at home. And Hannegret, not only being a full-time housewife, mother and teacher, also had to be a carer for her husband. Although the neighbours didn't see Christopher and the family very often, after he quit his job, if the neighbours ever did see him, they noticed that even though Christopher was in his 50s, he started to, when his health began to fail, he really went downhill quickly, and he started to resemble someone of around 80 years old. Yet the Donnellys never asked for any help. They didn't let people know if they were struggling, whether it be financial, emotional, caring, or anything like that. But so most people thought they were just a couple with 4 children who were very, very close. There was no reason for anyone to suspect anything was wrong. Yet on the 31st of March in 2018, emergency services received a 999 call from Hannegret, who had gone to her neighbour's house to make the call. She reported that her husband, Christopher Donnelly, was dead. He was dead on the floor of their bathroom. And what she said next was very strange and very shocking. He'd been dead for 12 hours before she made that call. She said she tried to revive him, to no avail. The emergency services and the police later said, "Why didn't you call when you knew he was dead?" She said that the family needed to mourn, to grieve, to come to terms with it before they did anything. Both the police and the ambulance arrived at the Donnelly household, and they did indeed find Christopher Donnelly dead on the bathroom floor. It was indeed corroborated that he had been dead for at least 12 hours, so he had died the night before. This phone call was made in the morning of the 31st of March in 2018. So he'd been there all night with Hannegret grieving for him, the children grieving for him. But when the police had a cursory look at Christopher, he was clothed. I believe he was wearing pajamas. But there were clear injuries to his head and blood gushing from an open wound. There were also more fresh injuries on the visible parts of his body, healing injuries, healed injuries, bruises old, new and fading, scars from very old injuries. A cause of death was unclear. It wasn't evident as to what had actually happened, so the police did have to launch an investigation. He was dead on the floor. A cause of death needed to be established, but the injuries on him and the fact that Hannegret had not called for help for 12 hours, and if she believed her husband was dying, she also hadn't called for help. This made the police suspicious, so they called her in that very night for questioning. When Hannegret was questioned by the police, she said very openly, candidly, coldly, "Yes, I've hit him. I've punched him in the nose. I've hit him with a rolling pin." She said this with very, very little, if no feeling. She didn't show any distress at the loss of her husband. She was very cold and calm. He had just died. Her husband of well over 20 years was dead. Due to Hannegret's admission that she had indeed struck her husband and had also admitted to pushing him down the stairs not long before he died, this gave the police a reason to arrest her. But they couldn't confirm that this was a murder, that she had actually caused his death, without a confirmation of the cause of death from the Home Office pathologist. So they actually arrested Hannegret and charged her initially with wounding with intent. When the police were doing their initial investigation, they conducted a search of the entire house, and what they found was clear evidence all over the walls and the ceilings, the floor, everywhere, of sustained, systemic, years-long abuse. Blood spatters from a sudden open wound that if you struck somebody with a rolling pin, if it caused a gash, it would cause blood spatter. These spatters, stains and pools and marks were old and new, all over the house. And DNA tests later confirmed that every single drop of that blood all belonged to Christopher. When Christopher Donnelly's body was examined, the Home Office pathologist was absolutely shocked. Christopher had so many old scars and built up scar tissue that they counted 78 distinct and notable injuries, which again were in various stages of healing, fresh, old and new. And he also had a cauliflower ear, which we normally associate with boxing. And there was a slight break to the cartilage in his throat. Some sources I've read said there was a consistency of a thumbprint on that. Some said it was possibly a sharp strike to the neck, or maybe she had at one point tried to strangle him. He had spinal and neck fractures that were again in various stages of healing, cracked ribs, and evidence of a previously broken nose, which Hannegret said that she did deliver to him. This man had been beaten, abused, and tortured, and had survived all of these atrocities. It must have been for years. They estimated that this had been going on for at least 2 years. It had been around 3, maybe 4 years since Christopher had stopped working due to illness. Hannegret said that not long before Christopher had died, I believe it was the day that he died, he was walking down the stairs, but he was walking a bit too slow for her liking. So she says she gave him a shove. Not too much. Make him move a bit faster. He's going too slow for her. He fell into a crate. And then she said that he cut himself on the head. Very badly. Yet she was the one who pushed him. And he cut himself. She downplayed the severity of the strike, saying he didn't have that many injuries. I didn't hit him that hard. And she said that when she punched him on the nose, it didn't leave a massive cut. But what she fails to understand, and I'm really amazed by this because she's a midwife. I think back when Hannegret did her midwifery training, I believe back then to become a midwife, you firstly had to qualify as a nurse. It's since changed. I'm not sure what the criteria was in Germany, or if she did indeed do her training in Germany or in the UK. But she should have known that if you hit somebody, even if it just leaves a tiny cut, there's internal damage. What was also disgusting about her testimony, she said that Christopher would often welcome the beatings, that he felt that he needed them and deserved them. But this is exactly the mind games that a perpetrator plays. They make the victim believe they deserved it, it was their fault. They make them resigned to their abuse. She said to the police that she chased Christopher around the table in a light-hearted way, but then after it resulted in her hitting him on the head with a rolling pin because she was offended that he did not take what she said seriously. Hannegret also told police that Christopher would often go into trances, or even possibly absent seizures maybe. This really angered her. She wanted him to just snap out of it. She wanted to G him up. She wanted him to get him out of that trance. So she'd hit him to try and, she said, reset something in him, to try and motivate him to get faster, to get more with it, to stop being lazy. Yet this man was disabled. And what she was doing to him over those couple of years was making him worse. At no point did Christopher retaliate or get violent with Hannegret, and she said that. But she felt so justified in what she was describing, what she did to Christopher, with such coldness. It's almost as if she was believing that what happened in that house was their business, nothing to do with the authorities. And she probably believed herself that anything she did to him had nothing to do with why he died. Hannegret had a mentality that she in her home had absolute authority, totalitarianism, whatever you want to call it. She was the empress in a nation existing within one household. Her husband and her children were hers, and they needed to dance to her tune, and if they didn't, there were consequences. And the children were younger and presumably in good health. If she wanted them to answer, they would have learnt to do that really quickly. But Christopher was in bad health. He couldn't answer quickly, he couldn't move quickly, he couldn't do everything for himself. She had to, and this made her angry. The Donnelly children were forbidden from having any contact with anyone on the outside and were subjected to Hannegret's dictatorial authority. The house was a separate entity from the outside world, and anything that happened in there, Hannegret was the authority. Not the police, not the state in which that house belonged, but Hannegret was. It's likely that after Christopher became ill, he had to leave his job, that Hannegret resented this because it was more responsibility on her. And it's possible that all the way through their marriage up to that point, which people do think was at one point very good, that maybe she always had that dominance about her. She always had that control. And up to the point that Christopher had to leave his job, she had the control that she wanted, and everything was working how she wanted it. So she didn't need to ramp up any fear-mongering or any violence. But when Christopher fell ill, this was a change to the dynamic of the marriage. This was a change to the dynamic of the household. She was at this point on a power trip. She would accept nothing less than Christopher doing what she wanted when she wanted. When the police asked Hannegret, "What is your role in the family?" she doesn't answer for several seconds. And then she says, "I like to know what is going on. I like to know what is happening. I don't like people talking behind my back. I like to know," as she said, "what is going on," etc. So her role, if you talk about your role in the household, you would probably say something like, "I am a mother, I'm also a teacher, I'm a carer, I'm a wife, I look after the house, I do the cleaning," all this. But no, she says, "I like to know what's going on." It's also likely that the trances that Hannegret described and other aspects of his failing health were brought about or exacerbated by her actions. He was likely anemic, he was likely ill, to the point that his mind couldn't process the signals, to the point that his body was not complying with possibly what he wanted it to. And he may also have disassociated from the situation. He may have just taken himself mentally out of a place to just get some sort of relief, but him doing that only irked Hannegret more. During the search of the Donnelly home, the police discovered more evidence of years of abuse. Hannegret's diaries. She documented in here exactly what she did to him. She wrote specifically that she hit him, that she pushed him, that she chased him with a rolling pin. And she also recorded that she denied Christopher Donnelly trips to the bathroom. He wasn't eating properly, it's likely he wasn't sleeping properly, he'd been wounded, and if you withhold your urine or feces for too long, it can result in infection. It was becoming more and more apparent to the police. They were absolutely confident that All of these injuries resulted in Christopher Donnelly's death. But when the autopsy was performed, the pathologists delivered a blow to the police. Christopher Donnelly had not died as a result of a beating or a fall down the stairs. He had died from pneumonia. This was a blow to the police because they were absolutely certain that Hannegret had killed her husband. She may not have intended to end his life, but she certainly intended to maim him. She certainly intended to not render him aid. They believed that the cause of death would turn out to be blunt force trauma, but it wasn't. However, this did not necessarily mean that Hannegret's treatment of her husband did not have a link to his death. His body had gradually and progressively weakened by the beatings and other deprivation abuses afflicted on him had significantly compromised his immune system. His constitution was weak. His body just couldn't fight anymore. When this happens, the person becomes susceptible to infection, and these are infections that the body just cannot rid itself of. It cannot heal itself. Christopher's body neither had the reserves nor the strength to fight the infection from which he passed away. His murder was 2 years in the making, bit by bit, little by little, breaking him down to the point that his body could no longer function. Hannegret also failed to call for help when he was ill, whenever he was injured. There was never any medical report. The whole time he'd been dependent on Hannegret, she had all the power, and she wasn't going to tell anyone what was going on because as far as she was concerned, she was the one with the authority. If any authorities or any professionals had been aware of any injuries inflicted on Christopher, there would be a record of it, and there probably would have been interventions, and Christopher may have been saved. The neighbours did see them, but not often enough, and they didn't know them enough to suspect that there was any kind of abuse or domestic violence going on, let alone that Christopher would meet his death at the hands of his wife. The police initially charged Hannegret with wounding with intent because this is something to which she had admitted, but it would have been very difficult to get a murder charge or conviction when the cause of death was pneumonia. You may have heard of the term mens rea, which in Latin means guilty mind. So it basically says it's the intention of your actions that are important, such as if you intend to hurt somebody, if you intend to kill them, if you intend to carry out something resulting in a crime. Hannegret had intentionally caused grievous bodily harm to her husband. But was the intention there to kill? She had not done anything to save him. So maybe there was. The police then had to successfully link Hannegret's actions or inactions to the cause of death of pneumonia. Now that was going to be very difficult, but this is what they weighed up when they did. The old healed injuries spanning a long period, the fact that Hannegret actually admits what she did. She admits to being coercively controlling. She was blatant and unashamed in her admissions of abuse. She did indeed push her husband down the stairs. She intentionally caused him harm with no qualms. She hit him with a rolling pin, which is a bloody big instrument, and it can cause serious, catastrophic and fatal injuries by itself. She failed to alert the authorities when he was injured and ill, and she failed to alert the authorities when she found him dead. All of these things combined, and the fact that the pathologist did agree that Christopher's immune system was severely compromised and him being subjected to these beatings and abuse did result in a weakened immune system that then resulted in pneumonia, which then resulted in death. With all of that, Hannegret was charged and she was convicted of murder. It didn't take the jury long at all to find her guilty. She was found guilty around a year after Christopher died in March 2019. And assuming she had been on remand for a year, she has now served 5 years of the 16 years that she has been sentenced to at a minimum. So life, 16 years at a minimum. I really hope she doesn't get out. Because if she can be that way with her husband, if she ever gets into another relationship, wow. I am amazed at the leniency here, because there was clear intention to harm here. Domestic violence perpetrated by a woman is rarely reported. Now, I'm not saying it's something that rarely happens, because quite often men don't report these things. Nobody has the right to harm anyone, their spouse or other. And there are women out there who have beaten, abused and killed their husbands like Hannegret did. We need to separate this whole man on woman, woman on man abuse. It is spouse on spouse abuse. This is a very rare situation of a family being so insular and within itself that there was no way of anyone to reach out for help. I want to draw your attention to another case of domestic violence which involved a woman assaulting her spouse. You may have seen the BBC show called Abused by My Girlfriend. It's about a man called Alex Skeel. Now, I'm not going to tell his whole story because he already has, and he's still here to tell it. But he was very nearly murdered by his girlfriend. She pled guilty to several accounts of grievous bodily harm, and also she was the first woman in the UK to be charged and convicted of coercive control. What his girlfriend did to him was horrific, absolutely horrific, and I would encourage you to watch that program. So a very tragic, very heavy, just awful case of someone dying slowly over a long period, and he must have been in so much pain and felt so weak. He didn't have a moment of relief. Nobody rescued him. With Alex Skeel, he was rescued because the neighbours reached out when they heard commotions. The police came round and Alex said everything was fine. The police came round again when the neighbours called again, and it was there that the police were able to get Alex out of that situation. So the police saved him. There was one particular police officer who just, he really felt passionately about helping Alex because he knew that Alex denying the abuse was a lie. The neighbours were the ones to make that call. If you hear something going on, don't turn a blind eye. Say something, because you may save a life. If that neighbour hadn't reached out, Alex Skeel may not be here. And he is an incredible person. So please, guys, be kind to each other and be kind to anyone else that you can. That if you think that anything is bad happening to them, it's best to speak out and be wrong than not speak out and be very wrong. I adore you all, and thank you very, very much for watching this video. Any suggestions for future cases, please let me know. I have the next few cases already planned out, but I may add them to my 2024 list. So thank you again, guys, and I will see you later, my little berries. Bye-bye.